This is the UARKFCA Timeout, the podcast where coaches and athletes share what God has done and is continuing to do in their lives. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. I got Coach Dave Richardson, head men's strength and conditioning coach for the basketball team here. I already butchered your title there, but you get people strong. That's what you do.
That's what we do.
That's what you do. Coach, so glad to have you in here today. Man, let's just start out. Let's get right into it. What's your story, Coach?
You know what, man? I've given my testimony a number of times over the years, and it's always really eye-opening to me because I reflect back on it. I was raised in the church, and it's just interesting to me that my story is probably like a lot of people's. And it may be different than most, but I don't know. It seems to me like it's a pretty normal story. You grew up in the church, and it didn't work out for you right away. You know what I mean? You found yourself floating away, it not being a major part of your life in certain times of your life. I've been out of college for a long time now, so to reflect back on it. But raised in the church, I used to tell people me and my brothers had drug problems because our parents drug us to church just every time it was open. And, so we lived that way. And then, you get into high school. And after high school, I went in the military. And then after the military, I came back to college on the GI Bill. Went to, my strength and conditioning career. And, it's a tough business. College athletics is a tough business. And I was fitting right into it, man. I was not living like a Christian. Like there was I couldn't be prosecuted. There was no evidence. Yeah. And so I just remember one time, I was at a small school where, in small schools, they change coaches every 3 years. They either win and move on or lose, get fired, and they bring in another guy. And it's part of, the way it is. And I'll never forget, I had one of our defensive back coaches would come by the weight room every day and sit in my office and say, "How are you doing?" And I would be like, "Man, why are you worried about me? I mean, you guys are about to get fired." I had a contract with the athletic director, so this was back in the day when that's the way it was. Mm-hmm. And he goes, "No, man." He goes, "I'm worried about you. I'm worried about your walk." And I just remember thinking, like, you got a wife and 3 kids, and, like, you're worried about me. And just the whole process of, them having a terrible season, getting fired, the peace that he had through all of that, and I'm just sitting back watching in amazement. And I was like, man, I miss that. I don't have that. Why don't I have that? And I'll never forget it, man. His name is Ray Richards to this day. That was 30 years ago. And to this day, man, Ray Richards and I we're as close as we can be. He's always a phone call away. He gave me a Bible back then. I had a Bible, but he gave me this Bible, and he said, "I want you in your career to pass it on." So I actually did that a number of years ago at Ohio State with one of our basketball coaches who was new to the faith and coming into it, and I was able to, I wouldn't say disciple him, but just kind of be there for him, and I passed the Bible on to him. But just by Ray Richards' peace in an incredible storm brought me back, and I started going back to church, getting involved, and I haven't missed, a beat since then, and it's been 30 years.
Man, I love the example that somebody else set is kind of what pulled you back in.
Yeah.
We were having a little Bible study last night, and we were reading the story of Peter and John talking to, they were on trial, and they were talking to these Sadducees and these Pharisees in Acts chapter 4, and it says that they could tell that they had been with Jesus. And it sounds like you could tell Ray Richards has been with Jesus, right? That he spent time with him, that Jesus has rubbed off on this guy.
You just know, don't you?
Yeah.
When you meet somebody with the peace and the, it's just an aura about them that they care about other people. They're not superficial. They're going to have a conversation with you. They're going to ask about you. They're interested in you. And, I think you got to kind of pick and choose your times to do that. But Ray knew my background because, we worked together. He also knew that I wasn't living it. And that bothered him.
Well, good for Ray.
Great for Ray,
yeah.
and great for me.
Yeah,
because the example that he set for me has just kind of driven my life over the last 30 years is being in college athletics, and I've been able to do the same thing with other. Hey, I noticed you got a tattoo, a cross there, and some scripture. What does that mean to you? How's your walk? So like if I see a Christian symbol on you, I'm going to ask you, like, how's your walk?
It's like a free doorway to.
It is. It's 1,000% because, hey, you're espousing that. I'll never forget. I had a player one time. This was kind of when Twitter was new, and he had like his name and a cross on his tag, and then some of the stuff he was posting. And I just one day told him, I said, hey, man, you can't do that. I said, you're reflecting Christianity on your tag, and look at what you're posting. And it just like the guy was in shock. He was like, you know what, you're right. And so if you're around me and you got a tattoo, you cover it up, or I'm going to ask you.
let that be a warning, right? Man, okay, so I heard you say this, that when you were at Ohio State coaching up there, you then were able to replicate what Ray did for you in somebody else.
Right.
Now, doing that can be kind of intimidating for somebody that maybe hasn't been up front or forward. How do you get over that kind of that feeling of like either that insecurity or that awkwardness that the conversation might create? How do you get through that, or do you just get through it? What's the trick?
I don't think it's even that. I think it's when you're talking to another staff member and it just kind of flows because they see the type of person you are, and maybe that, I might be calm in a storm. Hey, you got all this stuff going on in your life. He goes, and you're talking to me about me. He goes, well, what's up with that? And, different people have different backgrounds too, but it's sort of easy to talk about your story because you're happy about it. You know what I mean? How glad am I that Ray Richards helped turn me around? And I mean, Ray's just an old country boy now, lives in Oklahoma. He coached in the junior college, but his name now is known by a number of really high-end coaches, and he doesn't even know it. I could tell you the name of this coach, and he's a spectacular coach. And he knows the name Ray Richards because he's got Ray's Bible.
So because of Ray's boldness, I hate to go back to this. I don't hate to go back. I love going back to Bible stories. But in that same story in Acts, kind of the premise of that story was there was 4 dudes of this high priestly order that were trying to silence Peter and John, but they spoke despite that, and it was 5,000 that came to believe.
That's right.
And I think that when I think about the awkwardness and kind of the I don't really want to make people feel uncomfortable, or that's kind of like that. That's that 4 voices that are like, you're ruining people's day, you're being awkward, you're being rude, you're being aggressive with this. But when we break through that, then all of a sudden the 5,000 believe, and who knows how many coaches because of Ray Richards. Right?
And starting out, it's there's some things you can learn about starting a conversation and then seeing where it goes. And if it doesn't go where it needs to go, then you just move, you move on a different direction. But if it sparks something, then to take the next step, and then the next step, and then the next step. But if it doesn't have to be awkward. If you make a comment about, hey, look, man, church was great this weekend. The preacher talked about this. If you get silence like that, hey man, what's going on with you today?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But if it's like, well, what did you talk about? You know,
You're in now.
You're in.
You're in.
And it could be just as simple as having a conversation about, have you ever heard of this? This, it's actually in the, it's funny. I see these, I go to these strength and conditioning, and there's this iron sharpens iron.
It's here at Bev Lewis. It's on the wall.
Do you even know where that came from?
Well, I do, but
yeah, that's in the Bible.
Yeah,
really. It's funny because the strength coaches around the country have all kind of
like, I got a Bible verse on my wall.
Yeah, doesn't even know it. So I mean, there's a lot of different ways to start a conversation without feeling apprehensive about it. And if you get feedback, then to move on. If you don't get feedback, then you just move out.
Yeah, it's like you play the hand that you're dealt.
That's
right?
exactly right.
So I got to ask this. So you've now said you've been in the strength and conditioning business for 30 years at least.
Oh yeah, at least 30 years.
At least, we'll just say at least 30. And you've had a few stops along the way.
Yes.
I'm curious, as a coach, what have been some of the maybe differences or challenges or kind of just the then versus now? What was it like being a faithful coach 30 years ago versus trying to be a faithful coach in 2024? What are some of the new challenges that might have been presented in the new kind of era that we're in?
That's a good question. I think probably 30 years ago it was more accepted. Mm-hmm. Culture's changed a little bit. Now, a lot of people think being a Christian is being judgmental. Mm-hmm. And I have to tell people all the time, look, man, don't get mad at me. The Bible says it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? But I think there's just love people, man, and that's the number one thing is people have to know you care about them. Mm-hmm. And coach. I mean, somebody had that famous saying: "They don't care how much you know until you know how much they care." Mm-hmm. But I think if you care about somebody and you spend time with them and you build a relationship, then they know that what you say to them is not judgmental, but it's something that maybe could help them. Mm-hmm. And it could be lifestyle stuff too. I mean, as a strength coach, I mean, we don't want our players out smoking and drinking and mm-hmm. staying up late. I mean, it's all about positive performance. Mm-hmm. So we want, great training sessions, great recovery, sleeping 8 to 9 hours a night. I mean, and if that's what your focus is, then, and I, through the years I've had different players that didn't focus on that. Mm-hmm. But I think years ago it was a little maybe more culturally acceptable. Mm-hmm. But then there's a lot of cultural Christianity too, where people play the game. Mm-hmm. They know, especially down here in Arkansas and the Bible Belt, it's cultural. Mm-hmm. They know how to play the Christianity game.
That was the next question that I was going to ask, was between Ohio, which is further north, and Arkansas, and I don't know where else, all the places you've been in between. Yeah. But, here it's like, everybody grew up in church.
Right.
Right? And that's kind of one of the things that as you get to know somebody and you talk to somebody, it's like, oh, yeah, I grew up in church. And I'm like, yeah, well, when's the last time you went?
Right.
It's like, when I was growing up. It's been a minute for a lot of these kids. So you got to ask those questions. And, I just, sometimes it's kids are open to those conversations, and sometimes as soon as they feel like you're judging whatever that is, I'm putting that in air quotes, maybe they shrink back a little bit. And that's why I wonder in the day and age where it's let me do me, let me live my truth, back off, kind of like you can't tell me what to do. Everybody wants to be their own, the commander of their own destiny. You wonder, do you have to walk on eggshells a little bit more? And what you're saying is, well, really the formula hasn't changed. It's if they know that I love them and they know that I care about them, then doesn't matter if it's, 1990 or 2020, right? They're going to hear what I have to say and know that I'm coming from a place of love. Yeah.
And the rest of them, wait till the storm hits.
Mm-hmm.
Because then they're going to be looking for somebody that has dealt mm-hmm. and is dealing with it completely different than they are. Mm-hmm. And, I coached at University of Miami mm-hmm. Down in Florida, coached in Louisiana and Ohio State and here. So I've had a pretty good mix. I've been everywhere except the West Coast, and I'm not going out there. But, in Ohio, it was different. Like if they didn't go to church, you pretty much knew it. You know what I mean? And so, our ministries through our church and through FCA was a lot more, I think, real, because you knew what you were dealing with. Even in Miami, it was the same way. We were part of a really dynamic church down there that did a lot of stuff off campus. And so, it's just being back in the Bible Belt it's different, because everybody kind of knows how to play the cultural Christian game.
Well, that's actually a lot of my personal story, which I won't get into all that because that's not what people are here to listen to, though. I learned the Bible stories, and I knew what it took to give you the right answer. Yeah. That's like I knew how to pass the test.
You watched Veggie Tales.
Yeah, well, man. We don't want to get into my whole story, Coach. But, that was just it, is we know how to give the correct answer to get somebody off our back, right? And in this place, it's, you think, okay, well, everybody's a good Christian kid, but it's like, well, no, some of them just know how to navigate away from the conversation that they don't want to necessarily have with you, know. And as somebody who is, whether you're in a professional ministry job like I am, or whether you're in a professional strength job trying to do ministry like you are, right? We got to figure out how to navigate through some of that stuff, and it sounds like you've done a pretty decent job of that, at least in the last few years or so.
There's ups and downs, and I go back to the guys that maybe had a storm. Think about a season-ending injury, or hey, you're not getting a playing time, and how do you deal with that? And it's really a good time to put your arm around somebody, and you don't even have to talk about Christianity at that point. It's just like, hey man, be an encourager, help them. Hey, let's attack this injury, this rehab, or hey, look, you're not playing as much as you want. Let's get better. What can I do to help you? What can I do to help you get better? So, maybe you can increase your playing time, whatnot. So I think there's just all kinds of different avenues of just being the right kind of person at the right time.
There is an element of ministry that is, if I can show up for somebody and what they want, then they're going to be, I can then give them what they need. And I know what they need, whether they know what they need or not yet, right. which is good. You're in a good spot to do that. Coach, before we wrap up, I kind of got a couple of traditional questions we always like to ask anybody that comes and sits in the chair. What has God been teaching you lately?
That's a good question. I continue to read a lot. My son and I try to read the same books together. We just got the Book of Enoch that we talked about the other day. I think one of the things that's being pressed on me right now is the daily need for God. It's the old story of the Israelites getting the manna, but it only lasted for a day, so they had to go back every day. And I think it's time with God every day, because we just have so much stuff going on around us right now. Everything's kind of a mess, it seems like. And I think it's just a being daily, time daily, and the need just to start each day, fresh. We all have problems. There's days I have major issues, but I know when I go to bed and wake up the next day that God's forgiven me for things, and that we can start new each day, and I can thank Him for that and ask Him to direct me and guide me. So I think it's daily, just daily manna.
Yeah, fresh bread.
Yep.
Every day.
Every day.
So just from a practical standpoint, what are some of the ways that you've implemented that? You talk about getting up first thing in the morning and doing that. Is that doing devotional time in the morning, or how could somebody listening to this say, okay, I want my fresh bread today? Yeah. What's like a practical tip that you might be able to give? You
absolutely need to get in a quiet place, because there's so many distractions. I used to be able to come in my office early and close the door and do it there, but I've got to do it before I even get to work now, because it's just so much. You walk in that door, there's stuff to do.
Something's going to call your name.
Something calls your name, and so I think it's time spent. If you're a morning person, do it in the morning. If it's in the evening, do it in the evening. My dad used to read his Bible laying in bed at night, and I think he'd probably go to sleep on it sometimes. And so, that was the time when he, got into Word and did his thing. And, people are different, but you have to have that time.
And I'm hearing you say, this is so important. Find a undistracted, quiet place that's all you focus on in that moment. Because there's I think when we really take inventory of our life, we find that all the places that we think are quiet places are still full of distractions. So we almost have to create that. Even if we have to manufacture a quiet place, that's the necessity there. Coach, thank you so much for joining me at the in the studio here. You got a great story. I think that we've all can be encouraged by that, and keep up the good work.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of UARKFCA Timeout. If you enjoyed the story, learned something new, or both, consider subscribing and sharing this episode with a friend. You can follow us online at UARKFCA, and always remember to take the time out to recognize that you have a powerful story too.